Hello and welcome to Monarchism Unfiltered. I'm one of your hosts, McCosk.
I am.
This is bronze.
And on today's episode, departing a bit from the topic of history, as has been the case, we're now touching the subject of Catholic social teaching.
And Minecraft. Oh, what?
That's part of it.
Yeah, it's part of it now.
It's all part of it. It's
It connects.
and it's all gone wrong.
It connects people. It connects, dear listener. I assure you, it connects.
Especially the sort of, what would it be now? I think 15-hour play.
15-hour round, yeah. Dear listener, in case you haven't figured out, the quarantine is leaving us slightly loopy, just a bit.
Before we get into the whole topic, I just like to thank the people who made this episode possible. I'd like to specifically thank COVID-19 for making this.
Oh boy!
For making this all possible.
Episode 90% of all podcasts at episode 7. We reach 8, immediate nosedive. Fantastic.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I hope everyone's, keeping sane under the quarantine. Maybe you can listen to this. It's not going to make you more sane, but it's something to do, at least.
Yes. Maybe it will accelerate the process. Maybe after listening to us, you lose notion of time and space. A benefit, I've been told. In any case, Catholic social teaching. The name kind of explains what it is. It's the base social doctrine of the Catholic Church. Theoretically speaking, it has been a thing since the founding of the church by St. Peter. St. Paul? No, St. Peter. But when was it codified, are you aware?
I mean, it began codification around, I believe it was Rerum Novorum, which was basically in response to sort of sweeping social changes in Europe, and the coming of socialism, and political doctrines that specifically focus upon social life rather than, say, liberalism, which has historically just been sort of, either at the greatest extent of its kind of thinking was basically just anti-clericalism, whereas with Marxism and Prudenism or whatever, there began to be in Europe actual thinking about like political thinking about the social space, essentially, and thus you get a series of encyclicals which lay down the foundational principles of Catholic social teaching.
Okay, for those who aren't aware, Rerum Novarum was published in 15th of May of 1891. So the
By
content.
Pope Leo XIII, and
So yeah, it is essentially it can be interpreted as a Catholic response to the question of to the consequences of mass industrialization.
Yeah, because it was specifically what it was sort of a plea for to create change, because what they were seeing was that the working classes were suffering under like the industrialized capitalist system, and so it supported rights of labor, but it rejected both socialism and unrestricted capitalism. And it's also this encyclical that later lays the foundation for distributism.
Distributism, for those, most listeners, unless you came out of nowhere and found this episode, distributivism is a system that many monarchists favor, though I sometimes think the interpretation of what actual distributivism is a bit vague at times. it's a system that effectively tries to spread the means of production as far as wide as possible. Right, Pons?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's about like having. Yeah, it should that you want a wide number of owners for productive assets. So instead of having a single person owning a factory, you have many people each owning a small workshop. That's the sort of the idea.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like it was a synthesis of different things like Catholic social teaching, but also other things. And the key names in distributism would be G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc, that wrote a lot about what it means to be distributist. I think we'll talk about more about that later.
Yeah, I mean, so the I think the fundamental basis of Catholic social teaching is the idea that of the fundamental value of the human. So not merely like human life or human pleasure, but a focus upon human flourishing, where human flourishing is understood to be in the terms of like a sort of virtuous life, sinless life. So you see this with I think the clearest expression of this would be the Christian socialists in Austria, though I use the word socialist there just because they called themselves the Christian Social Movement, which is translated as, or should be translated as Christian Socialist, but the term at the time doesn't mean what it means now, and Christian socialism obviously is slightly different from what they were doing. And basically, the point of the state was to save life or to save souls, essentially, is I think the quickest way of describing it. And I think the sort of interesting part, at least there to me, is that the explicit focus then is on a kind of balance between these kinds of centralizing forces that you see in modern society, such as large industry, the state, and on sort of actual human needs that come through, that ultimately are very local, limited to a certain place, time, so on and so forth, which is what you see in distributism, is this focus upon trying to have things as local as possible, trying to have things be as local as possible to give people control over their own lives.
Yeah, I mean, one of course, Chesterton had the famous quote, and we've said it before on the show, that politicians should be close enough to kick, and that's sort of like part of the spirit they were going for. If everything should be as local as possible, so that you can have control of your own life
And
have freedom.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, understand what in God's name is going on. Like, let's be honest here. Like all of us are university educated in this context, and it would probably take us 3 episodes each to explain just but 1 percentile of what's going on today's international politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think quite clearly one of the key issues that I think you see crop up in a lot of Catholic social teaching is the way in which people's lives have kind of escaped their own control. We find ourselves increasingly subordinated to highly impersonal forces that can't really be understood. And elude any kind of understanding or clarity. I mean, you see this quite clearly in Ivan Ilyich and his sort of the liberation theologists in general touch on this, especially when they're more focused upon like weird Amazonian tribes or whatever. And one of the interesting points they make is this kind of almost primitivist point that much of modern technology has the effect of distorting sort of the image of God because of this subordination to the logic of like, I'm gonna go work because, or yeah, you sort of the kind of life or world
You
of
you work to live, you live to work,
yeah,
basically.
that kind of it, and you see this as well in like Rerum Novorum, that it's like the end of life is sort of is to the end of life is not to accumulate wealth or to have these kind of material possessions, but to have a kind of sense of fulfillment, and to live a life that is in harmony with God. And that what a lot of people have criticized or sort of made the focus of their efforts has been the idea that modern life acts against that. That modern life fundamentally causes us to compromise in certain ways that prevent us from being able to do this. Um, I mean, a quite clear example, I think, would be sort of the way in which I think almost all like Doritos or fast food, or no, not fast food, like preserved food uses palm oil, which is obviously incredibly harmful to the environment. And I think a lot of people, if they understood like what was involved in production of palm oil, um, wouldn't actually wouldn't actually buy it, and it's sort of or products using it, but
Yeah,
it's
but that's
Used
it's certainly
almost.
true, but it's also more than a choice thing, because even if you're aware of palm oil, it's often incredibly difficult to completely sort of avoid its use in products because it's so widespread. So you have
Yeah, almost.
like you're trapped by the system into being complicit in it,
Basically any type
especially
of
in
cereal based food has it at this point.
especially if you are, for example, from a poorer socioeconomic background, and the choices that are available to you, for example, in food, are much more limited. Not only by what you can afford, but what is made available to your community. Because of course, food deserts are a real issue,
Yeah.
and so often you can't choose, and so you're forced to live with those consequences, and that can be incredibly difficult.
Also, in case the average reader isn't aware, the
Reader.
uh, listener, reader, it's all quarantine. In case the average listener isn't aware, palm oil is very destructive, in part because it's practically destroyed the vast majority of the Burmese forests, is driving apes into extinction, and the people who live in Burma are being horribly exploited. The vegans don't like you to know this.
Well, some vegans. I don't think
Well,
we can.
some do indeed. Some do indeed. Well, the vast majority do care. Only bullshit vegans don't.
Yeah, trying to not get us sued, but okay.
Our social credit score is already down the drain. I checked.
We might as well name those
I mean,
northeastern Chinese regions a couple times, and
yeah, I mean, I feel like the Chinese don't really care, especially sort of COVID at the moment.
yeah, also because this show isn't available in China, officially
Yeah, but
speaking.
the Chinese hitmen are available in our region, sadly. In any case, back to the central topic. The Rerum Novarum, especially in context, came to address the difficulties that were arising in a person living a decent, humane, and Catholic life in the 1890s. It's arguably, while the base principles still do apply in the 2020s, it is arguably one would think that it had to be more all inclusive. Like, I don't know about you, but I think the papacy should really ban trad Twitter. Just saying.
I mean, the issue with banning stuff like that is just that it's like it's basically impossible to enforce. I mean, the quicker and easier thing that they could do would just be to like ban or like limit any kind of priest engagement on Twitter or like online. I mean, I think just in general, it's kind of obvious that most of the internet is fairly toxic, isn't conducive to any kind of spiritual well-being or whatever, and that it would just be better to like, yeah, like, I mean, I think on a fairly basic level, mass media like Twitter, like parts of Facebook, like parts of Discord, 4chan, all of that.
The podcastosphere.
Yeah, the podcastosphere that I know. Yeah, I know buckets about that, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we're in it, so we're
vibing in it. I mean, I think all of that kind of stuff realistically is not conducive to any kind of, you know, locally led life that is like, you know, you feel that you've got a certain level of control over whatever, you know. I mean, it's even something as basic as like cancel culture. It's the kind of anxiety or fear that is produced by having thousands and thousands of eyes upon you that never know and sort of only really care about judging.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is forgotten. So, I mean, I think the goal is, in a sense, to create a world where people no longer feel the need to get red pilled on ifunny.co.
Oh yeah, clearly. Clearly. I mean, obviously we were all red pilled here
That's
on iPhone.
on iPhone. That's where it all started. You know,
Of course,
someone posted a Belloc PDF, and it was downhill from there.
Yep.
Exactly. I mean, I think the clear issue, I think, with the internet is just like how it produces this kind of toxic culture. And I think insofar as, like, you know, it should ban trad Twitter or whatever, it would just be that, you know, you shouldn't be Catholic and you shouldn't be overly online. That's like that's like, I think that's basically what I think they should say. I mean, as to banning, like, you know, specific people or whatever, I don't know, who cares really? Like 90% of trads don't attend church of any kind, as far as I can tell. So, you know, who cares really?
Just turned into roasting trads.
Unless they're actively posting during mass, which
Well,
doesn't.
I mean,
live blogging adoration.
yeah, live blogging the Tridentine Mass, you know. Soy face. Marcel Lafarbe should be a saint. Soy face. No, I mean I think in a way what and I think in a certain way, you know, the whole tendency recently of like, I'm a 17-year-old atheist, I want to convert to traditional Catholicism because that sounds based. What do? That whole like Reddit, Twitter trend, whatever, like thing, I think itself is kind of the result of the very thing that Catholic social teaching was dedicated to criticizing, which is the kind of fundamental inhumanity of a significant portion of modern life. And I mean, I think we see this even in something like the critiques of fascism by Pope Pius XII, because his specific point ultimately, in the case of both, namely that they were pagan, was that the kind of worship of blood and state and money, which I think are like all equally wrong, ultimately are like imperfect copies of what is the true end of life, which is like virtue, a sort of well lived life that is fulfilling and leads one to communion with God. And so the kind of criticism that Catholicism leveled against modernity in the form of Catholic social teaching was specifically that modern life has warped all of reality to, kind of inhuman signifiers, be that genetics, be that some kind of arbitrary state, be that money, or in a more relevant example here, clout, basically. And that's why you get people who sort of go, I want to convert to traditional Catholicism. One, for clout. Two, because it sort of seems like something that motions against modern society. Though I don't think it does.
No, not in the way that they're doing it.
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, yeah, it's like you can be someone like Tolkien. I think quite clearly he was acting against modern world. But that's something I think quite different to say. I don't know, some weirdo online, Rouge V or something. I don't know. Yeah, I think it was Rouge V.
I mean, we didn't have to name names.
Yeah, it's a bit cruel. Yeah. Anyway, but I think the very core of Catholic social teaching is this point that and then that's, I think, what is contained in the point about communism and fascism. Because I mean, you see this with Cardinal Sarah. Cardinal Sarah says that like the twin evils of the 20th century were communism, and fascism, precisely because it was, in the case of communism, it was the reduction of all life to the demands of like, I don't know, historical necessity, the state, whatever thing you want to name. And then in the case of fascism, it was the reduction of all life to nationality. And as far as I can tell, they are correct that the societies produced in both cases were monstrously inhuman. I mean, there's some of the most interesting internal critique, or some of the most interesting critiques, I think, of both come from inside the system, that you see with, I don't know, people like Walter Benjamin or Ivald Ilyenkov in the Soviet Union, Walter Benjamin in Germany. Ilyenkov, for example, criticizing the way that socialism, which was meant to have produced a society with a human face, which obviously is where I think someone like Cardinal Marx is correct, that there is a connection with socialism, between socialism and Catholic social teaching. But Ilyenkov specifically leveled the criticism of Soviet society, that this ideology, which had been meant to produce a more human society, had ended up creating a far more monstrous machine, which was, horrifically decrepit, oppressive, meaningless, sort of Kafkaesque, all of this. And I think in part that is based upon the fundamental devaluing of the human that was inherent in Soviet society, the reduction of any person to mere, historical necessity, all of this. And yeah, I mean, I think you can see this most clearly in, say, the quotes by Che Guevara, where he says, we would have willingly used the nukes upon New York and sort of climbed over 100 million dead, if it had meant victory. And that, I think, is the kind of logic that is critiqued by Catholicism. This kind of cavalier attitude towards modern society that we see almost everywhere. Sort of abortion,
euthanasia,
euthanasia,
like
polyamory.
Like a debasement. Well, in modern society, it's really a debasement of life to essentially a string of sensation and nothing else. Like if you're like at the basic level, modern day society the goal, as it shall we use the term, the meta of life in the modern day liberal capitalistic way is simply just try and live as pleasurably as possible in the most selfish way, in the most selfish interpretation of the word pleasure possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, I think, basically what happens with, it's like Karl Marx calls the utilitarians the sort of most bourgeois philosophers on the planet, moral philosophers. And I mean, to a certain degree, I would agree with him, because I think, I think there's a clear distinction, say, between the kind of systems like capitalism, or capitalist democracy, and the Soviet Union or whatever. And the clearest distinction I can see is that is what is embodied in the utilitarians, which is the Mill's pleasure principle, which is that if it doesn't hurt you and it's pleasurable to me, then it's good. And that,
if you're not hurting anybody else, then it's fine. That means do as you want.
Yeah, do as thou wilt, and all this. And so it's that kind of logic, I think, that underlies the casualization of sex, the casualization of abortion, the casualization of contraception,
drugs.
Yeah, I mean,
the casualization of horrible human exploitation.
Yeah, and it's this kind of I think drugs is a very good example, because it's like, I think a lot of people online, especially online, have this kind of idea that, what does it harm anyone if I just smoke weed or whatever, and or maybe do coke or whatever. It's like, who cares? But the precise issue there is that all of these kinds of drugs, all of these kinds of intoxicants have the effect ultimately of subordinating you as a person with value to them, and as like a mere sort of tool or whatever.
I mean, you are no longer a person. You are merely a heroin taker. You're just
No, this is both an indictment of drug pushers, but also society's attitudes towards the drug takers, in particular, how often maligned they are, when most of the time they are people in desperate need of help.
Yeah, and I think the kind of logic, like you know, it's I think it's far. I think there's far worse things in society really than drugs, but it's
Yeah,
I think it's a quite good example. I mean,
it's emblematic without a doubt.
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, like there's a Jewish rabbi in the U.S. who, you can go watch him give speeches. I can't remember his name now, but he he talks about like finance industry because he used to be in it. Not to be stereotypical about Jews or anything, but he specifically said, it's like the amount of like realistically speaking, if you're a Jew in New York, according to the Talmudic law, you basically shouldn't be a banker, because you basically can't tell who's going to turn up to you and be a Jew, and if you charge a Jew interest, you like won't enter heaven. And so the key kind of issue, and even further than that, um, if you do usury, you won't get into heaven. And usury just means anything above like normal rate, essentially, which would be 5% or something. So I mean, I would argue the same, at least because of usury. Christian laws against usury are still in the Bible, and so it seems to me that pretty much like anything like a payday loan, um, like is exploitative in a
Yeah,
way.
and Belloc specifically talks in his book Economics for Helen, discusses the topic, and I think it's very interesting because he has one of the best definitions for usury, in that he doesn't define it based on like the interest rate paid, but on the character of the loan. For example, if you charge interest on a loan to someone who's going to, like, I don't know, buy, the example he gives is buy ships so that he can do trade and then make money off of it. That's all right, because then it's sort of, you're investing, like you are charging for the value you are creating by giving him the money now. But charging interest on a loan for someone to buy bread would be usurious, because then what you're doing is you're profiting off of their misery.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
function.
and I think that is like that is quite clearly and unfortunately character of a significant portion of modern banking, basically.
Yeah, I mean, payday loans are like almost by like on the tin about this kind of profit through misery, because it's like you need money right now. You're not going to make it till your next payday, so you should take out
or
the
or
loan.
even or even more insidious, consumption loans, as they're called over here. Just want to buy a new TV? Well, take a loan, and you'll pay it for the next 5 years. Typically, they also throw in these with the packages of buy all of your electronic appliances, with the interest rates being oftentimes 10 to 20 times of what it would be if had you just paid it on one single go, or not
Yeah,
take.
but often it's not in. Often they get even, because it's not just interest. Because often they have very low interest rates, but astronomically high fees, or some
Yeah,
other, like where if you don't pay your fees in time, your entire balance of payments is reset, and that's a real one.
Jesus Christ, that's what's done. No, let's not name names here. But yes, dear listener, though you might have been aware, but we never know. Capitalism succeeded in not making us all die of starvation, failed in making us human beings, and that it systematically encourages a brutal dehumanization of of everyone under its watchful gaze, into the role of a consumer. All of this to hammer in all of what we've been saying, hammer in the point that Catholic social teaching, while perhaps not well, or more accurately, Catholic social teaching has manifested in Rerum Novarum because it has been developed since then by either other encyclicals or other, or shall we say, more recent understandings of the term, typically carried out by Christian democratic or Christian socialist parties, Christian social parties since then. But even then, it is still at the very least an ideal to strive for. Because I often think, especially in capitalism, that not only to the often documented alienation from production, as Marx describes it, an alienation from God, an alienation from ourselves even, clouds us and kind of freezes us into a pit of inaction, where we simply give up before we even try.
Yeah, I think that's a clear issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think, in my opinion, where all the consumption, the hedonism almost comes from, is trying to fill this God-shaped hole.
And not all the material wealth in the world will fill it. The base level here, I realize this chat is intensely Catholic, even though we have an Anglican amongst our mix.
Well, an Anglo-Catholic, so it's.
I remember a certain saint that was that before he became Catholic.
Well, I mean, during his most of his writing, Chesterton was a Anglo-Catholic, so.
Yeah, you're safe. You're safe. You can, though I do remind you, you can have tea and crumpets in the Catholic Church, you know.
Yeah, the ordinary. I'm aware of the ordinariate.
But joking aside, although this is a very Catholic, although this is a very Catholic message we're sending here, this ultimately applies to any religion. I do not wait. Prosperity theologians are in favor of capitalism. So, all religions that are not so filled with mental syphilis, like prosperity theologians, would never, under any circumstance, approve of what's going on here. So
no, I'm certain if this were, I don't know, say a Orthodox podcast, and I think the message would be pretty similar.
heck, why we're excluding our Abrahamic brothers? I think even the Jews and the Muslims would approve of this message.
Yeah, I mean broader than that even.
I have yet to hear Buddhists pray to the Buddha of industrial production and dehumanization. Well, technically it would be Bodhisattva, but that's a different topic.
That's not. We're not going to get into Buddhist theology. Not because it's not interesting. It's just I don't think that's we could do it justice.
Yeah, like most of the topics we've covered so far in this podcast.
Yeah, I mean we haven't done it. Yeah, but time is a issue. So because we don't do anything justice, but we try. We try.
And that's all that matters. And well, all that matters, it's also for you, dear listener. Hopefully we inspire you to do something, even as little as starting your own monarchist podcast where you talk with your friends about stuff. You never know who might be listening and who might be inspired. God, no, like just ask. I mean, this is going on our monarchism, for Christ's sakes. Every single one of them knows about mad monarchist and how he was absolutely critical in basically creating an entire generation of monarchists, in so much as the term generation can be applied to the tragically thin amount of people. So you never know. Or really, whoever gets red pilled on iFunny. Both avenues are legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, I think to bring in the fabled Minecraft connection, the key thing that I think why a lot of 20-somethings are nostalgic for Minecraft is basically just because of this sense of productivity for its own sake, and living life for its own sake rather than for the sake of, I'll earn money to get a job, or I'll earn money to save up, or I'll earn money to earn money. And all of these kind of displacement activities that modern society finds us performing, that it's like, why was the medieval king virtuous? They were virtuous because they should be virtuous. For someone in the Soviet Union, sort of this civic virtue that was promoted was for the sake of human progress or society, rather than being something that was an aim in itself, basically. And I think that is something that a lot of video games, a lot of online spaces promise, and I think in certain places do deliver on, which is why I think they become very, very popular.
Yeah, any game with a steep challenging curve also applies. Why do you get good on Dark Souls? So you can get good on Dark Souls.
Also, so you can tell people that you're good on Dark Souls, but
That kind of defeats the point, because it then becomes a rush for social clout, doesn't it?
yeah, it's almost like
Right.
performative trapness in that sense.
Yeah. One would also argue that this is kind of the corruptive nature of capitalism in of itself.
It's commodified everything.
Indeed. Well, I was about to say, Christ, imagine if capitalism commodified salvation, but then I remember evangelicals exist. I really should watch my tongue, because probably we have had evangelical listeners. Probably.
I mean, realistically, I'm not so sure that there's going to be very many evangelical
prosperity theologians in the viewership. I mean, but if we're wrong, write a comment.
Yeah,
Well,
tell us about that'd be pretty based.
Heck, if your comment is good enough, we might just invite you in for the show for a round table debate. Why not?
Yeah, anything's possible. So, if you are an evangelical and you haven't left already out of disgust, then write us in the comments. Tell us about why you think
How
otherwise,
we're wrong.
or why we agree, or why we've done you injustice.
We're also in this to learn, believe it or not.
Yeah, and even if you're not an evangelical and you're not mad, you still write in the comments and smash the like button. Because this
Doesn't this
too,
go on Spotify?
this goes on. I didn't. Yeah, it goes on
everything.
Yeah, it goes on everything. I don't even know what we're on, but we're on there. So whatever the equivalent is of smashing the like button, do it, because we too live under capitalism.
Well, right now we're living under quarantine. Capitalism is suspended.
Well, no, me and Bronze aren't. We have freedom. You don't.
Yes, indeed.
The rights of an Englishman.
Yes, of course. I am here in
Scotland.
Scotland.
All non-English countries are Scotland, so jot that down.
Base and red pilled. Reminds me of my iFunny days.
Yes, the iFunny days where we were red pilled.
When I was red pilled on iFunny, good people but shit mods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good people and shit mods. Wow, this episode really can't get on track, can it?
No. The tracks have been detonated.
The tracks were made by Railcraft.
That is, yeah.
I'm not sure that many people will get that one.
I don't think
That is a special one.
If you get what I'm talking about, like, comment, and subscribe, or the equivalent.
Good old Railcraft.
Reblog us on your favorite Snapstagrams.
Wow. Just why don't you tell them to send it to send to your friends via MSN Messenger?
Yeah, send an MMS on your camera phone that they should download our latest facts. But you don't download the facts, do you?
Well, you don't either download it.
Print our latest podcast by fax.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I think. Is this on Morse code?
Well, I don't know, but we could try.
If telegrams have not reached your area yet, then we'll send our we'll print out the dialogue, and we'll send our best man on his fastest horse
via Pony Express.
Yeah. We make no guarantees as towards the survival rate of our riders. He might get COVID or dysentery.
Hopefully both.
Hopefully both.
It cancels out, is it? Christ. But to attempt to give focus on this increasingly diffused episode, largely due to quarantine, is that at a base level, what we're trying to say here is, don't give up. There is always hope. Don't
be the change you want to see in the world.
And other ready-made phrases that we can say to sound deep and totally not out of idea.
I am so deep. Hold on, let me go into easyquotes.com.
I do wonder if, like, our viewer base appreciates when we get more rambly and just start talking mad shit.
If you don't appreciate it, then tell us in the comments. Or if you do, also tell us in the comments.
We kind of need feedback.
As was once said, happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. That's the AZ quote of the day by Jane Austen.
Wow.
It's not exactly very compliant with Catholic social teaching, but
nope. So yeah, please give us feedback. We kind of need it to improve this. If your feedback is about my audio quality, please fill out the appropriate forms.
Oh, they will. They will.
I have no luck. But if there is something that can be said of this mess of the podcast, is that, and I think this ties earlier to the discussion on the earlier discussion about utilitarianism, is that you should not sacrifice your ideals or your values for the sake of the immediate. At least try to think long term. Like, perhaps there's a bit of a background, but one of the modern problems with the left, the right too, to a certain degree, though the right has far more serious issues in terms of morality and ethics than the, at least, European left has. I make no comments about the American left. Is that you have this thinking of the immediate, of this the ends justify the means attitude, and really underlying utilitarianism that often fails to effectuate anything. Because I don't know about you two, but every time I speak to any other people, to any person dissatisfied with the status quo, no matter of the ideology or stripe, you often find this very short-sightedness of, okay, we smash capitalism. Okay, how would you do that? Oh, we kill all the capitalists. Okay, what's the capitalist? Anyone who engages with capitalism. Okay, so millions of people. And this is assuming they run out of ammunition and do not engage in planetary genocide. And like the end point is, okay, for what? Congratulations, you killed millions of people. You made everyone's life's worse, and your only answer will be, oh, in the short term, because it will get better. Based on what? The corpses you've left on the way, the lives you've destroyed, for the sake of what? The ends do not justify the means. The means justify the ends. Like if you're trying to make the world better, and you do not, and your idea of a better world is a world not filled with horrendous violence as a common occasion, then perhaps do not advocate violence at the slightest provocation or as a matter of course.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's basically my position as well. I think it's the basic message here as well, in general. But yeah, I feel like this is also a good place in general to leave off.
Yeah, because I feel like the graph of sanity is just an exponential downward curve.
We're about any longer, and we'll start talking about rhizomes.
Amazing. Hey, rhizomes. Root plants.
I don't even know what that is.
No, yeah, you don't. It's pointless. Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave off as any. See everyone next time around.
Yeah, next time around. See you. And remember to smash like and reblog and fax.